Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. As always, appreciate you for tuning us in, and it's always nice to see Mr. Jim Eichenhofer as we continue our player profiles. Today, El Presidente, the professional shot shooter. You have many a nickname. Do you have a nickname for CJ McCollum, Jim?
I do not, actually. I'm going to have to think about that one and come up with them, although it seems like he already has plenty.
He does.
Not sure if he needs one from me.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, obviously, when you look back at his season, all he did was set a franchise record. In what department again, by the way?
Three-point shooting percentage?
Yes, three-point
makes.
Yeah,
actually.
3-point makes.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah.
Yes.
That's kind of a big deal in the NBA, isn't it?
Yeah, you could say so. You could say, especially since the Pelicans historically have been kind of near the bottom in that category. They finished 18th as a team. Still room for improvement, but I mean, without CJ, I'm not sure what number that would have been. It might have been 25, 26, 27, something like that.
Incredible. And obviously, he dealt with some injury, but for the most part, you can see the difference between not having a ligament tear in that thumb and not, right? I mean, he had one of his best shooting seasons.
That's a good point. That was so far in the back of my mind of like how much that affected him in the previous season. So you're right. You see how much more effective he was, and just the fact that he wasn't trying to play through a bunch of stuff this season. And that was part of the results that he ended up a career high also in three-point percentage, which is pretty darn good if you think about the fact that he's been among the best shooters in the history of the NBA in terms of percentage, that he's pretty regularly around 40%, but this past season was the best he's done in three-point percentage.
No doubt. And I'm looking around the office. We have yet to get a case of his wine, by the way. I would like to try that wine. Are you trying the red or are you trying the white?
I'm not much of a wine guy, to be honest with you, Gus.
Wow.
CJ's wine is great, though.
If we ever get to taste it, we will say it. I love it. Aaron Summers is going to join us here in a quick minute and go through. Will Guillory is going to join us at The Athletic here in a quick minute and kind of go through his season overall. But to the level of importance, really, to where the Pels got 49 wins or more, I guess we have recency bias, but that road trip, he was unbelievable in that road trip. Was that the best part of his season this year?
I think it was. And I think if you look at the team's record in the games that he played this season, you could do this with a lot of guys, but for him specifically, a lot of the toughest part of the season record-wise was when he was sidelined in November. So I realize there were other factors behind it, but really, if you look at how they did in the games that he played versus they were 42-24 when he played. They were 7-9 in the 16 games that he didn't play. So, I mean, that's one of the many things that you could point to of how important he was.
All right, well, let's have Will Guillory sit down with us and go over CJ McCollum's season. Time to welcome in Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic as we continue our New Orleans Pelicans player profiles. CJ McCollum is on deck today, and we will bring in Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you guys for having me on.
I've done it so far once this week. I got to do it again. Sorry, Jim. I know you have a long list of very important questions for El Presidente here, but Will Guillory, have you ever wanted to throw something onto the court? Whether it's a pen, a notepad, something in the direction of an official? Just asking.
It's just most games that Tyler Ford officiates. I want to throw stuff. I got to thank Jim Eichenhofer. He's usually the one that stops me from throwing things on the court whenever I see Tyler Ford. So I want to thank Pels PR first and foremost for sitting Jim next to me at games to calm me down and get me in the right headspace.
That's in the under the other duties as assigned part of my job description. So I've added that of keeping Will Guillory under control. You know what, though, Will, to be honest with you, you're so far down the list of people that we have to worry about keeping their composure that I can't even find. I'm going through my list right now. I can't even find your name on this. You're so far down. You might be on like the 4th or 5th page. So no, you're good, man. I've heard you specifically call out Tyler Ford in different instances. So I am on higher alert when he's officiating the game. But so far we haven't had any problems. I mean, the distance from the court I think helps and makes me a little bit less concerned. But there's a lot of how should I put this? More temperamental folks in our area of the Smoothie King Center than you will. So you're good on that front.
Yeah, we keep Jim busy. We keep Jim busy over in our section. But, it's always something exciting going on.
It is interesting, though. I'm sure you were shocked that Draymond Green said, while it was a dangerous act, Jamal Murray should be suspended. It's not a suspensionable act or whatever. I don't even know if that's a word. Suspensionable act.
Suspendable?
Suspendable act. That's
Yes.
what it is. See, this is why Jim writes, and I just talk for a living, and then I get corrected on the air. But no, it's crazy. Not once, but twice. Twice. He threw something twice at an official.
I know. I literally just saw the video of him throwing the towel 15 seconds before he throws the heat pack. I mean, if the heat pack didn't make it, I want to know what was coming next. Was he going to pick up a chair and throw it at Mark Davis?
Oh, that sounds like a poll question.
How much he was going to progress?
Yeah. I mean, is that crazy? Like when you think of that?
Yeah, it is really crazy for the star player to be throwing stuff at the official during the middle of a playoff game. He was putting more effort into throwing stuff at Mark Davis than he was into scoring buckets for his team. So, it was a rough night for the defending champs. That's for damn sure.
Look, we've been starting this week before we get to our player profiles with a simple overview question of your thoughts overall on what you thought with the Pelicans. We've asked everybody that's come on so far this week from start to finish. How would you describe this season?
For CJ?
Just on the Pelicans overall on the team before we get to the players.
For the Pelicans overall, I think it started off obviously very promising. Them winning 49 games, tied for second most in franchise history. I thought they made a lot of progress as far as keeping the big three on the court together more than they've ever been. I thought that was a huge part of it. I had a few different moments where they overcame adversity. I think that was really good, but it's just unfortunate that injuries really hit them at the worst time at the end of the season with B.I. going down in Orlando and then obviously Zion going down in the play-in tournament. So I think overall it was a successful season, but the way it ended, no doubt leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
Speaking of players being on the court more, CJ played in 66 games, and really the only reason that he wasn't into, maybe the high 70s as far as games played was that collapsed lung injury that he had, which is not something that I think we've seen too often in basketball or the NBA. But overall, I mean, the Pelicans win 49 games, most wins they've had in 15 years. I have to keep reminding myself of that the regular season was very successful, but how much of a vital part of it do you think CJ was as far as them being able to get to that level and ending up where they were at the end of the regular season?
No, I think it was a fantastic season for him. And you mentioned, that collapsed lung injury being something we don't see so often. The crazy thing is it's the second time that it's happened to CJ. A few years ago in Portland, he had something similar where he got hit, in the stomach region and had to sit out for a couple weeks due to collapsed lung, which is really scary, having something like that happen to you 2 times. And it's crazy for it to happen to CJ because it's not like he's John Morant driving to the lane every time. It was just kind of 2 freak accidents where he got hit in the rib section and, it put him, on the sidelines for a while. So, yeah, I thought, besides that, it was an outstanding season for CJ. Not just doing the typical things that we know him for, but I think what was so impressive was him, so deep into his career, kind of switching up the way he plays, kind of becoming more of an off-ball threat, shooting more threes than he ever has before. I thought he was, improved on defense, showing more just focus and attentiveness on that. And I thought, we know how consistency he is and how you kind of depend on that 20 every single night. But the way he went about doing it this season was much different than I think what we've seen from him in the past.
When you think about, one of the things that we've talked about with the Pelicans in recent years is that, how many times have we said, going back, I would say even 6-7 years, that they need to take more threes, they need to shoot more threes. How much of a part of that is what makes him valuable in this offense is, he finished 3rd in the NBA in three-pointers made behind, I think it was Luka and Steph Curry were the only ones that made more threes. I mean, how much do you look at that as something that, you know, was valuable within the offense, that they just have to take and make more threes?
No question. And he kind of, you know, allowed his actions to follow his words, because he was one of the main ones preaching the message about them shooting more threes. And he's a guy who throughout his career has been known for, you know, making plays off the dribble, ISO, you know, attacking guys. And, you know, when we think of CJ, you always think about between the legs, step back, mid-range jumper. He really wasn't that guy. He was taking way more three-pointers. He was taking more transition threes, more catch-and-shoot opportunities. And I thought he really set the example for the rest of those guys with his aggression, seeking out three-pointers. And I thought that was something he was very mindful of throughout the season, was seeking out opportunities to get those threes up, even if it meant, you know, giving up the ball, allowing other guys to you know, do more with the ball in pick-and-roll situations and dribble handoff situations. I thought he did a very good job of kind of shifting his game. And you hear that a lot about guys later in their careers, learning how to, you know, do different things, learning how to be effective in different ways. And I thought he was a prime example of that this season. And for him to do it and to be as effective as he was, I mean, he breaks the franchise record for most threes in the season. And like you said, he only played 66 games. I mean, to do it, you know what, I still remember bringing up the conversation to him during the West Coast trip about, yeah, you're about to break the three-point record. And he was like, I didn't even think it was possible because I missed so many games. And it speaks to just the high volume of three-pointers he was putting in on a consistent basis on a team that still needed to shoot more threes. So it spoke to how important his three-point shooting was for his team.
Yeah, I think we came into the season, I know Jim and I were thinking, right, like when we think defense, we think Herb Jones. And when we think offense or three-point shooting, we're thinking, hey, this rook Jordan Hawkins or Trey Murphy, right? Trey Murphy's going to be the guy that leads the three. I don't know if a lot of fans or even myself thought that the three-point franchise record would be broken by CJ. And to your point, with some of the games he missed, and also on some of those where, yeah, you know, you have 5 or 6 a night, and then sometimes he'd struggle and have, you know, 0 or 1 or 2 on that. Just kind of gives you the idea of the volume to it. But you're right. That's the one thing that I look back at this season. Three-point shooting in today's NBA is so key. The fact that the Pels, Jim, were one of the top teams in three-point shooting this season, and that doesn't happen if CJ McCollum's not knocking down shots from beyond the arc, Will.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's important. We always talk about the example CJ setting for this team, his willingness to buy in and do something different for the betterment of the team. I think that was something that everybody needed to see, specifically the top 3 guys making that sacrifice, you know, shifting their games, do what benefits everybody else. And I think CJ did that as much as anybody else this year with the way he upped his three-point shooting. And I think, you know, we can kind of get into the age-old Pelicans questions about, you know, true point guard and traditional point guard. And what I always say whenever people bring up this conversation, I say, I'd rather a guy who's making 253s over a guy who plays quote-unquote traditional point guard. And I think CJ kind of embodies that of a guy who, you know, is a constant threat from the perimeter, who can get you 30 points on any given night. And I think just a guy who's a constant threat at the position to do something off the dribble, or if you leave him open on the perimeter, he's knocking down those shots. And I thought, you know, the way he was able to space the floor for Zion this year was extremely key to his success. And I thought, you know, during that West Coast trip at the end of the season where they go to, you know, Portland, Sacramento, Golden State, where they won 4 in a row leading up to the playoffs, I thought it was some of the best basketball I've ever seen him play. He was incredible during that stretch, making 7, 8 threes every single game. And just for him to step up the way he did with B.I. out, it was huge for his team to kind of put themselves in a position where, you know, that rough stretch during the homestand where they went 1-5, they were able to erase that even without Brandon Ingram, because CJ really stepped up and started knocking down shots at a ridiculous rate.
Yeah, he was 29 for 47 from three-point range on just that 4-game road trip. So, like you said, that is unbelievable. He averaged more than 7 made threes a game over those 4 games. I mean, that was just a level that was amazing. I mean, I thought, too, the three-pointer he made against Golden State that took the lead from 3 to 6 with about a minute left in that game, when he made that shot, I'm thinking this is going to be the biggest basket of the season. This is going to get them in the playoffs. Obviously, we don't need to go through the scenarios that happened that prevented that from being the case. But, you know, one of the things that you mentioned, Will, that I had on my list, and we might as well get into it now, was him kind of on the ball or off the ball. You talked about how, there's been a lot of discussion about pure point guard, and David Griffin addressed, basketball IQ and that kind of thing the day after the season ended. For CJ, I mean, is it the kind of thing where it's like, he's not going to play the whole game off the ball, but he's not going to play the whole game on the ball either? Is it kind of just finding the right balance between those, or is it trying to make life a little bit easier for him? It just seems like maybe, I mean, with as great a 3-point shooter as he is, if he's off the ball a little bit more, maybe it's not as taxing. That if you can find him some more like catch and shoot opportunities and just wide open shots that he's not going to get when he's on the ball, because obviously somebody's going to be guarding him and right nearby all the time. I mean, how do you see that situation as far as what the Pelicans might need to do going forward, or what they might try to do as far as his role goes?
Yeah, Jim, you about to get me fired up with Pelicans Twitter right now, because I got a whole lot of thoughts on this. But I think, we've talked for multiple years now about wanting to live in a world where Zion Williamson takes over more of the point guard duties, right? Where he's initiating more of the offense, when he's the guy bringing the ball up the court. And when that's the case, you need guys who can space the floor. You need guys who can take some of the pressure off of Zion when they're crowding the paint anytime he has the ball. And I think CJ has been, better than that than anybody this season, frankly. And I think a lot of people look at Trey Murphy as the number one spot-up guy off of Zion plays, but I think there's no doubt, if you watch this team, that CJ was the guy spacing the floor for Zion at a higher level than anybody else this year on a more consistent basis. And I think you're exactly right. That ability to be that guy who can make plays off the dribble, running off of screens, running in transition to three-pointers, versus also being a guy who late in the shot clock, you can throw him the ball, he can create something off the dribble. I think that's something that's really rare in this league, to have a guard who can do both and be effective next to two ball-dominant guys like Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson. And I think having that asset, I think, was super valuable for this team. And then you crank it up to another level when you talk about the volume he was doing it. Like you said, having games where he's hitting 7, 8 threes. He, of course, has the Pelicans record for most three-pointers in a game. I mean, this is a guy who can get hot really fast and just start pouring it in bunches. And I think having that, I think it was something that he kind of was learning on the fly, but I thought he did a really good job of adjusting his game and learning how to be effective, like I said, next to two ball-dominant guys like D.I. and Zion Williamson. And I think overall there are going to be a lot of questions this offseason about, should you have more ball handlers around Zion and B.I. to take some of the pressure off them? Should you, completely move CJ off the ball and just make him a full-time two guard? But I stand firm in saying, give me the choice between a guy who's hitting 253s or a quote-unquote pure point guard, and I'll take the guy who's pouring in the three-pointers. That's just me. I think that's today's NBA. You need guys who can make three-pointers at that kind of rate, and you need guys who can just any given night catch fire. And I think CJ did that as much as anybody in the league. And I think if he would have played, 70, 75 games the way we're used to seeing him, I think we would have heard even more talk about what he did as a three-point shooter this year, because it was unprecedented as far as this franchise goes, what he was able to do. And I think he also did it at an efficient rate, which made it even more impressive.
I think part of the problem with the pure point guard discussion, honestly, is that there just aren't that many available. And I mean, the ones that are coming out of the draft are guys that are going to be, obviously it's going to take them a little while to get used to the NBA, and the guys that are already veteran players are not coming available. You can't just walk around and find one of those guys easily. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, one of the words that you mentioned earlier, Will, about CJ was the word mindful. And I kind of wanted to go a little bit behind the scenes in terms of, you talking to him, interviewing him throughout the course of the season. I think one of the things I find the most interesting about CJ is it just seems like he puts so much thought into everything, whether it's, he's looking at the analytics, he's looking at, the difference between, one of the reasons why he's talking about the team taking more threes is because from an analytical standpoint, it makes a lot more sense to take threes than to take deep twos, which is something that he has talked a little bit about in interviews. It just seems like across the board, whether it's the game itself on the court or off the court, he just really, again, uses the word mindful. It just seems like that's the kind of person he is. I mean, what is your experience from that standpoint in terms of just, the way that he goes about his business, I guess?
No, you're on the money, Jim. And I think getting to know him and getting to know a few people around him, I think I'll put him and Rondo, kind of Rajon Rondo, in the same neighborhood as far as guys who think the game more than anybody else I've been around, and the amount of time and thought that CJ puts into his game and the way he plays, I think is really incredible. And I think, people who aren't around him don't really get the scale of what he does on a daily basis to kind of evaluate himself, evaluate the team. I've written before about, he's constantly getting clips sent to his phone from people who work for him showing, what does it look like when you go pick and roll dribbling to your right? What about to your left? How does it look when you're shooting pull-up jumpers? How does it look when you're scoring in transition? I think he's constantly evaluating his game, where his shots are coming from, where he's less efficient, where he's more efficient. And I think he's always looking for ways to improve his game, to make certain tweaks to his game. And I think, obviously, there are times where he's a tough shot maker. Let's keep it clear. This isn't a guy who's flying into the lane and getting a bunch of layups. He's a guy who lives off making jumpers, frankly. And I think, when you do that, there are going to be times like there were during the playoffs where the jumpers aren't falling and he's looking rough. But I do think the way he's been able to be so efficient for so long as a jump shooter, I think it shows the amount of thought he's putting into where those jump shots are coming from and how he's going about creating those shots. As a guy without elite athleticism, without elite size, he's able to consistently get to his spots and make shots at a high rate. And I think a big part of that is the amount of thought he puts into his game and the amount of time he spends evaluating himself. And I say it all the time. I think if more guys had his mentality about the way he approaches the game, I think it would be a game changer for so many guys in this league. Just because I think that's one of the toughest things for a lot of players in this league is to look in the mirror and evaluate themselves. I mean, we talked about it a lot this year with Zion Williamson, and Brandon Ingram has a lot of that to do this summer coming off of the playoffs. But I think that's something that comes natural to CJ, constantly evaluating himself, seeing what's wrong about his game, and making those adjustments. And I think that's part of what's allowed him to be, such a consistent scorer in this league for so long. And as he would tell you, to make a whole lot of money in this league.
That's a great behind the scenes that you just kind of gave us there, because as you were speaking, I'm thinking of John DeShazer on our broadcast after a bucket that CJ gets in a timely bucket or a big three goes professional shot maker. And what you just described is professionalism at its finest there, right? I mean, being able to look at your shot and getting those clips. And Will, as you were saying that, another thought passed up to me. That's almost invaluable to have on a team because not everybody does that. So when you have a guy that can do that, you're hoping that translates everywhere else. But that also means that is an added, weapon. I mean, that's an asset. You don't want to just give that up.
No question. It's an example for everybody else, and it applies to everything he does, right? It applies to, how he sleeps, how he's eating on a daily basis. What is he doing? How early is he going in instead of going out, during certain road trips? I think you're exactly right. He's a pro's pro. He's a guy who takes his job very seriously. He knows what it takes for him to be effective. He's not out here, running these streets, or, you don't have to worry about him during that, 4-game road trip. 4-day trip in LA, I should say, where it's like, okay, you got an off day in LA. What's CJ going to be doing? You ain't got to worry about that. He's going to be in his room watching clips of himself, trying to figure out where he can get 2 shots in. And like I said, there are going to be times where his style of play is frustrating, no doubt, just because he's a guard who doesn't pass the ball as much as other guys. He's focused on getting his shots. But I think I'll point to consistently his efficiency. That's all I have to say. Just look at his efficiency, what he's doing from night to night, the way he's knocking down shots. When everybody knows where his shots are coming from and what he's trying to do, he consistently is able to do what he does. And I think you're exactly right. Having a guy who sets that example for everybody else in the locker room, is invaluable. And I think the Pelicans were very, I'll use the word again, they were very mindful of that when they acquired him a couple of years ago, and being that veteran presence in the locker room around guys like Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado, Zion Williamson. They were very big on bringing him in and having them see the way he works on a daily basis. And if you've heard from all of those guys about how seeing CJ work on a daily basis kind of changes the way they approach the game as well.
Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic covers the NBA, your New Orleans Pelicans, the Heat, and soon on ESPN, the Ocho, towel tossing at officials or something. I don't know. I was trying to come up with something much more witty than that. But yeah, it would be pretty fun just to see, you know, like if you're like on a chair standing, can you make it half court? Can you make it 3/4 court? Can you get it to the other free throw line? I mean, a weighted towel and stuff. I think this could be a nice summer, 1 a.m. show. What do you think, Will?
Yeah, you gotta throw it with the offhand. You know what I'm saying? You gotta throw it with the right and the left. Right. You gotta be able to hit a moving target.
Target.
We gotta add all type of elements to this.
I'm sure there's some science to like how tight you have to tie it to get it to
there
fly
would
the
be.
furthest
You
distance.
know there would be. Yeah,
Man.
exactly. You'd have people tie certain knots for distance and air. I mean, why not embrace this if you're the NBA and Adam Silver? You know what I'm saying? Towel tossing, heat pack tossing.
You gotta love seeing star players throw stuff at referees.
It could be an all-star.
This is why we tune into the games.
It could be an all-star weekend event. You could put it in like
100%.
before the skills competition or something like that.
It is. It's a skills competition.
Yeah, no doubt.
Listen, if they made this an event, I think there will be several Pelicans executives lining up. Be the first one to throw stuff at referees. They officiated Zion this year. I promise you that.
I like what Will just did. There's two different levels. You could have players and executives competing against one another. I like that. Yeah, I like that. See, look at you. See, this is why we have you on. Will Guillory, thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate it, bud.
Appreciate you, fellas.
All right, thanks to Will Guillory. Jim, again, when you think of where CJ can go that next level, it's great to hear Will talk about all the extra steps that he does to try to figure out what he can do and improve in his game. I guess this is what we've been doing, unfortunately, and what Pels fans are doing in media. When you look at that playoff series, when you look at the way the season sort of ended or the season overall, what do you think is CJ's next step of improvement? What do you think he's kind of going over his head of what he wants to do better? Because this is what he's doing right now.
I liked what Will talked about in terms of some of the detail that he got into as far as CJ's preparation, how mindful he is about the way he approaches his job. And, something that CJ addressed during exit interviews was just focusing on improving his assist-to-turnover ratio, doing more conditioning so that his defense can be improved. He mentioned more lower body lifting to improve his lateral quickness. So, I mean, he's already got a bunch of things on his list that he's going to work on. And I remember going back to last summer, how much the coaches praised him going into training camp, that he was in extremely good condition.
Yeah.
And it just seems like you can count on him to do a bunch of things that Will described, but one of them that you can count on him for is that he's going to be totally ready on day one of training camp to prepare for the season and be in excellent shape, and just all the stuff that he does as a veteran. That's one thing that you can rely on when they start things back up in the fall.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, that's crazy. He's already starting to work right there. I have no list, and I'm just trying to get through today. But that is CJ McCollum, a professional basketball player, and I'm, just a guy that knows how to turn on a microphone.
You're a pro, Gus. Don't shortchange yourself.
I'm a pro at something. I don't really know exactly what that is. That's Jim Eichenhofer. Give a follow, Jim_Eichenhofer. I'm at GCat_17. And thank you, as always, for tuning us in to New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.